Okay, so some technical difficulties I think we've got sorted out. And just to kind of briefly recap, non-duality, God, which is love, peace, which is denied, rejected, for the idea that there could be something more than that, which really is the choice towards nothing. But in order to make nothing seem like it's something, the ego thought of guilt is added, which then makes it seem like a viable choice and then removes God, non-duality, from awareness. The problem then becomes that this, on the abstract, one mind, one Son of God level, begins to be experienced as terror. Guilt as an abstraction, fear becomes the experience of guilt. And so the mind then is occupied by this experience of terror. Rather than letting that go and realizing the nothingness from which it comes, the imagined guilt that is solely used for the purpose of seeming to provide an alternative to non-duality and seems to provide the experience of specialness, but unfortunately is rooted in terror. So rather than letting that go, the problem then becomes, how does the mind then cope with this unrelenting, constant, all-consuming experience of terror? As we mentioned, it's as if we have an empty glass, an empty jar. We fill that empty glass with an idea, imagine blood, an imagined sand that depicts this terror, and then how do we cope with that? The coping mechanisms are to repress, deny, suppress that terror, that blood in the glass, so it seems to then go outside of the glass, and this is where we have the blood outside of the glass, or we tilt the jar upside down, and instead of having the one constant experience, we are able to then line up the grains of sand in a chronological order, and at the same time dilute the experience of terror so that it feels somehow able to be dealt with. And this is where the world comes into play. And again, the other strategy in part of all the denial is to split that guilt and terror, simply because the ego thought system is basically of duality, of separating. It employs that strategy again and takes the experience of terror and then splits it into two parts: the guilty party and the party who experiences the terror of the guilty party. So it's a victim and victimizer. The irony is still that it's one experience, but by that, again, that notion of separation provides the ability to kind of cope with that terror. Now on the abstract level, again, remember that this is the one mind, and that when the grains of sand, when the blood gets spilled out and becomes the physical world, by design, the human body is no longer then aware of the mind. It is a state of mindlessness, and we are able then to act out the guilt tripping, the pain management, coping with suffering, which is basically the struggle of our life as a body in the world. We are unaware of where that comes from, and so we attempt to deal with it in the world. And the heart of our relationship is always that I suffer because this is what somebody else has done. And that's that separation of the guilt and terror, the victim and the victimizer. And it's manifested in form in our relationships. To solve that problem here in the world, in our relationships, the Course teaches is magic. Now, magic is simply problem solving at a level where the problem does not exist. And so we utilize our brain and our brain chatter, which we think are our thoughts, but it is all part of the magic act. So our bodies are magic. It's a way for the problem of terror to be attempted to solve on a level where it doesn't exist. Oxygen is magic. Water is magic. Our homes are magic. Our livelihoods are magic. Time is magic. All of those are pain management, terror management. But we don't see it as that because we remain ignorant, remain in denial of what's here, and see it only in separated bodies. The beauty of it here is that I don't have to take responsibility for the guilt, for the suffering, because it's always done to me by someone else. And as long as it's done to me by someone else, I can hope and pray that that other part will change so I no longer suffer. but it refutes the fact that it comes from one single entity, now split in two. So the Course actually teaches that where there seem to be two is nothing more than a magic trick to try and negate the responsibility of pain and suffering, and to be able to maintain a sense of specialness. So in the Course, again, when we get to the notion of mistaken identity, here's me, here's you. In the Course, you would always be considered brother. Brother would be always something that I disown as no longer myself. This is me, this isn't me. Of course, when we have this available to us, we see that it's all me, just split up into these little grains of sand, into these separate components, with the strategy that I suffer because of your sin, your wrongdoing. So what the Course does is provide the miracle in terms of returning the problem solving to the level where the problem exists, or at least seems to exist, because remember, it comes from nothing, it's imagined. That's where we get the idea of hallucination, delusion. And so what we want to become aware of is no longer trying to solve the problem on the level of magic, trying to attempt to solve a problem where it doesn't exist, but to go back and solve the problem at the level it exists, if we want to. The Course is all about willingness, and what is the key to this is one's willingness on the level of mind. Not so much here, but as we begin to understand, how does one get in touch with this? By watching what goes on here. How does one get past denial? By looking at the blood and tracing it back to where its source is. Tracing the grains of sand back to the sources, to understand what the purpose of this is. So the Course asks, what is the purpose of everything? And it's a rhetorical question in many ways, because the purpose of it is for the mind to be able to seem to vomit out its terror, vomit out its suffering, and maintain itself by these magical techniques of pain management and suffering. What happens, though, is that we seem to, and here comes the kind of the proverbial moving the decks around, rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, because it's not really solving where the problem really lies. So when we talk about the miracle, it is restoring our sense of mindfulness of what thoughts really are, contrasted with a world of magic and brain chatter. So what we want to do is understand how we operate in our relationships here is a direct relationship actually to what goes on in the mind. And if we're really going to solve the problem of suffering, we're going to have to do it on the level of mind. What we're trying to do, it seems, is to establish duality without terror. And what the Course is teaching is that that's an impossibility. That if you have duality, you need to have separation, and for there to be separation, something has to be different than the other, and then that difference has to be valued. So in the initial setup, I separate from God, from the state of peace, the state of love, of non-duality, and opt for guilt. That gives contrast. That seems to imply that there is something significant to choose when in fact there's not. So what we're trying to do is have our cake and eat it too. We're wanting to maintain our specialness, wanting to maintain our sense of power in establishing significance and having meaning and having purpose, and making it seem here in this world as if it can be done with a multiplicity of tasks and events and things which seem to be different, but are in fact always just this in a different shape and form, because that's where this comes from. This is where the Course talks about, this is the dreamer. The secret dream is actually the destruction of non-duality, the rejection of non-duality for the desired individuality, the desired specialness, the desired uniqueness. It's like, I want God to love me, I'm not interested in being love, the love of God, which is the truth of who we are. So what we're trying to do is hope to pull off that specialness can be done without suffering, without terror, without blame. We're trying over here, trying to establish that relationships can be done with love. And the truth is that they can't. because they're founded on the notion of difference and separation, opposition. And so the true answer is to let go of the desire for specialness, the desire for individuality, ego, and all of its strategies, and remember truth, which is this pure, unadulterated, never affected state of love, state of peace. So, what can we do then in this world? Look at our relationships and understand that we are in a constant conflict, not because of what goes on here. It doesn't matter what one person does. That's not the source of the suffering and the pain. The suffering and the pain comes from here, and the splitting off of it into my brother, my denial of that being myself, no longer works because it still can't obliterate the pain and the suffering. And what I really can still attest to is this reality of this love that does exist and can never then be transported. The temptation is always to bring this over here, which is why we have this notion of God being a unique and special, powerfully loving being, because it's just us in a perfect state. We don't want to let go of all this and take ourselves back to the state of non-duality, because that would be to lose our significance, to really realize there is nothing significant, nothing meaningful going on here. So it's a gradual process, because to go from here to there, what keeps us from doing that is that we hold on to the guilt, we hold on to the terror, and we actually think that we can solve it here and do the smoke and mirrors trick and this magic of somehow making duality doable. To make duality, to make relationships happy and easygoing. And what the Course is telling you is that that can't be done. That if you want peace, go to where peace is. That if you want love, go to where love is. But we continually reject it and try to seek it in our magical world where it doesn't exist. So, this is where we get back to what the Course is talking about in terms of mistaken identity. Here's where I think I am. I think this is me. And here's you, who I don't see as me. And then there's this mind, me, that is abstract, that I'm not in touch with. And then there's the true me, which is the love, the state of peace that is non-duality, that is God. So when we use kind of Judeo-Christian terms, the God that made me is this state of non-duality, not the self that I make here. And so that would be one of the corrections that the Course offers in returning ourselves from the magical, mindless state to the mindful state of the miracle and understanding what's going on, and then through no longer being interested in it, no longer choosing to fill this empty alternative with something that seems to block this out. So when I let go of the guilt, when I no longer want an alternative to non-duality, when I no longer want an experience of being special, of being significant, of being meaningful, what happens is that alternative idea of there being something else is no longer filled. The Course would talk about this as being the right mind. The Course would talk about this as being the Holy Spirit, which is simply the memory of God. I still have this sense of separation from, but because it really doesn't have any substance, I see its nothingness, I see it as not being desirable anymore. It's very easy then to remember truth and to adhere and go back to it. So my choice is not really to be loving. My choice is to no longer reject love, and not in the form of the world in the magic show. It's not solving the problem where it exists. So what I really am wanting to take a look at is my investment in this and all the tricks that I use to maintain it, to see through that, to see through that every day, every minute, every event, every person simply reenacts this here for the purpose of it not being so clear that it's here. But my choice then becomes to let this go, to see through the idea of guilt, to see through the idea of suffering, to get past that to where my mind is again clear and nothing blocks the memory of God. So in essence, that's what the Course is that I move from here. I understand what relationship here is. I understand that I declare not me is in fact me by virtue of the fact that I'm unified here. And when I let go of that, when I can reunify myself, in essence what I'm doing is taking duality and putting it back towards a state of unity, sameness, which then mirrors the non-duality that is God. So in short, that's kind of what we've been talking about in the course, and we practice this relationship and tracing it back to its source, regaining the miracle. And one thing to kind of clarify again is that we so often confuse mind with brain, thought with brain chatter. The course is actually directed to ourself here and not here. But much as in child therapy, we ask that speak to me rather than what makes me. The puppeteer, the puppets. The dreamer, the dream. Dream characters. The author, the novel. Story characters. So the difficulty is, again, as we started out saying, is that we're very infested in not remembering this. But we simply can't block out truth. And we know that this experience of constant terror and constant suffering at some level isn't worth it. I deserve better than that. So eventually we do go back to that. And because this is also, time is just a part of the strategy. So again, just to recap, there's the me that I think I am, and there's the me that I think is not me. There's the me that I don't even, not even aware of at this point, and then there's the truth of who I am. So you and I are actually two characters in the same dream of the same being, for lack of a better word here. So we're actually joined, and we have to then recognize the strategy that seems to keep us apart, when in fact we're not only the same. It's as if we took an apple, cut it in half, and here's half of the apple, and here's half of the apple, and I declare this half of the apple is me. And it's just nonsensical after you begin to practice this, and this becomes your kind of default way of looking at the world. So it's like myself, you, dream characters, one dreamer, waking up to the full awareness of truth and non-duality. And that's the course. If you're interested in more information, Foundation for A Course in Miracles, facim.org, or if you're in the Chicago area, we have our Chicago class that meets every week and tries to get past our denial and remember this over and over again, with the little hope that our willingness will be re-inspired to let go of the suffering that we make out of nothing and return to the peace that we reject. Thank you.